named it the Gospels, and or the Good News, and it's the Good News not by me, but the Good News by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And the reason I looked at this topic was because we started to study the book of John in Sabbath school, just after we'd studied the book of Mark, several quarters after we'd studied the book of Matthew. And I thought, hey, we're getting the same message 3 times here. So why did we need this many Gospels? Why did we need this much? Well, I know why we need good news. We all need good news. But why are there 4 Gospels at the beginning of the New Testament? I guess that was my big question. Why are there 4 Gospels? So I decided that my tiny brain would investigate this topic, and I would try to find out why we have 4 Gospels. And it became a fascinating study for me. I was really interested in what I found. So I hope you are too. So the first thing is that each Gospel sees Jesus in a slightly different way. So let's have a look at the Gospel of Matthew. And you can look in the text if you like, but I've got a little summary at first. What is this Gospel of Matthew all about? And the Gospel of Matthew was written by a Jew for Jews. It was the second book written, even though it's first in the New Testament, it was the second Gospel written, not the first one. And it sees Jesus as a king. That's the emphasis. It sees Jesus as other things too, but the emphasis is on Jesus as king, a promised king. And the last thing is that it has a royal genealogy. So let's look to see if there is actual proof for what I've just said, because you know I'm one of those people who don't like making a statement unless we've got proof for it. So, Matthew 1:22. And you will see that this becomes a common theme. Matthew 1:22. Now, all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of by the Lord, by the prophet, saying, and then there is a quote from Isaiah 7:14. And if we have a look a little bit further down in chapter 2 and verse 15, you will see the same thing. That it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of by the Lord, by the prophet, saying, and then you will find a quote from Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. And you go down in the same chapter, a few more verses, down to verse 17, and you will find the same thing. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken of by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and there's a quote from Jeremiah. You can tell this book was written by a Jew because he is quoting the Old Testament, which was their scriptures. And you can tell it was written for Jews because only the Jews would understand all these Old Testament scriptures. And you think, well, 3's not very many. That's true, 3's not very many. So let's have a look. Chapter 3, verse 3 says the same thing. So it's fulfilling another prophecy, this time in Isaiah. Chapter 13 says the same thing. This one comes out of Psalms. And chapter 27 says the same thing. Again and again in Matthew you will find references to the Old Testament. In fact, there are over 90 references in Matthew to Old Testament prophecies. Amazing, isn't it? And that's why they put the book of Matthew first. Even though it was written second, that's why they put the book of Matthew first, because it is a bridge from the Old Testament into the New. So you can see a lot of texts. I've only given you 6 there. So we talked about how there was a Jew written for Jews. In fact, that Jew, Matthew, was an official. He was an official person. And we will see why that is relevant as we look at this next text. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. And what does it talk about? The family tree. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Who was David? A king. The son of Abraham. And then it lists off the other people. Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. Now, we don't normally hear about Judah. We hear about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why have they included Judah? Because that's the line through which Jesus came. That's the son. Judah was the son through which the line of Jesus was descended. What else do we know about Judah? What terminology have we ever heard? That Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Have you heard that? Yes, we have. And so this is the tribe of Judah. In Matthew 2, we see that there are wise men. I think we heard about them this morning in Sabbath school. The wise men who came bringing their gifts. And they came to worship whom? A king. And the next one, we hear that Bethlehem is told, out of you shall come a governor, a ruler, somebody in charge. And that's a direct reference to Micah 5, verse 2. So we have a royal genealogy, because this family tree traces its way through David and down through Joseph, who is the adoptive father of Jesus. Not the human father, the stepfather. Don't know how else we can say that. Not the real father. And so we have a king being prophesied or being told that a king will arrive. This is an official position, a king. And Matthew, an official between the Jewish people and the Roman government, writes about an official position, the position of king. As we go further into Matthew chapter 3, we find that John the Baptist announces who? A mighty one. In chapters 5 to 7, we have what we know as the Beatitudes. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of a king has a kingdom, and every kingdom needs rules or laws. And if you look at it, Matthew 5 to 7 are the laws that Jesus says, this is how my kingdom works. This is not how the Roman Empire works. This is not how the Jewish state worked. But this is how my kingdom works. And what are we told? Blessed are the... I'm hearing a few answers. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Can you see how this kingdom is different to the kingdom that everyone was expecting? These are the kingdom laws. Let's have a look at the next little bit. Matthew 8 and 9. There's many miracles in these couple of chapters. And these miracles show Christ's power. There's about 12 miracles altogether in the book of Matthew. 12 is the number of government, and that's what a king does, govern. Matthew 13 has a large number of parables in it. They're called the Kingdom of Heaven parables. And in these parables, there are 15 parables in the book of Matthew. 12 of them start with the kingdom of heaven is like. 12 of them. That's the majority of them. The kingdom of heaven is like. We're talking about a king and his kingdom. So we have, that was a bit fast. We'll go back to, don't know what happened there. There, the kingdom of heaven parables, and then chapter 21 talks about the entry to Jerusalem as a king. So we have this emphasis. It's not the only thing that's talked about in the book of Matthew, but it's an emphasis. So, in summary, Jesus as king. Jesus is the son of David. David is a king. Jesus is the promised Messiah of the Hebrews. Jesus came to bring the kingdom of God. Jesus was rejected by his own people. Jesus was crucified as King of the Jews. And Jesus fulfilled the law and the prophets of the Old Testament. The book of Matthew sees Jesus as king. Isn't it great we have a king? What does the book of Mark do then? Mark was a book written by a Jebusite. That's somebody who lives in Jerusalem, not a Galilean. And it was written for Romans. It was the first book written, even though it's placed second in the New Testament. It was the first book written. And it shows Jesus primarily as a servant, nonetheless a powerful servant. And there is no genealogy. So, let's look at the evidence for what I've just said. Chapter 11, verse 1. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem, unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. You think, well, how does that prove anything? What it shows us is that the writer of this gospel was very familiar with the area surrounding Jerusalem. All of these areas are the villages and the towns and the geographical features, and he's accurate in his description of those places around Jerusalem. So it's written by someone who knows those places well. And then in Acts chapter 12 and verse 12, I tell you what, I've got a tricky finger, a tricky thumb here today. This tells about how Paul, or Peter, came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark. And there was a prayer meeting in that house in Jerusalem. So we have that he was somebody who lived in Jerusalem and he knew the area quite well. You will notice that there was no genealogy there in the book of Mark. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, he's a servant, and servants didn't need genealogies, and probably still don't. But also, he's writing to the Romans, and the Romans did not have this fascination with family trees the way the Jews did. And so he has organised his gospel according to his audience. In the next little section, you can see the evidence as to why it was not written to Jews, that it was written to Gentiles. And in Mark chapter 5, verse 41, I haven't got the rest of the verse there, but it just says, which is being interpreted. And quite a few times in this gospel, you will see that comment, which is interpreted, or which means. And so Mark is explaining to his audience, a Gentile audience, Jewish customs and Jewish words. He does it again here, where he explains this Jewish custom of washing their hands. And it explains, all the Jews, except they wash their hands oft, eat not, following the tradition of the elders, and many other things there be. So he's trying to explain to his readership who are not aware of Jewish customs. And then he goes, explains again, it is korban, that is to say, a gift. So he translates the meaning of the word. Again, ephphatah, which is be opened. So he once again explains the meaning of the words. There are only 2 Old Testament quotes in this book of Mark. That's compared with 90 in the book of Matthew. So, the next little bit, we have some more evidence about Jesus as a servant. In chapter 1, verse 12, we find this. And immediately the Spirit, what does it do? Driveth him into the wilderness. The Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness. He didn't lead him. He didn't invite him. He treated him, in the book of Mark, the way a servant would be treated. Driven in to a wilderness, not a pleasant place. The next one, in Mark, still in the first chapter of the book of Mark, verses 33 and 34, this is what we see. And all the city was gathered at the door, and he healed many that were sick of divers diseases, and cast out many devils, and suffered not the devils to speak, because they knew him. Before we even get to the end of the first chapter of the book of Mark, Jesus is working. And he's working hard. Why do we know that? The first line. And all the city was gathered together at the door. Not just there were 2 or 3 people waiting to see him. All the city was there. He's working, and he's working hard. And you find that same idea a little further down, 4 verses further down. And he said unto them, let us go into the next town, that I may preach there also. And then he adds this little extra bit, which you can't really read. Yes, you can, just there. It says, for therefore came I forth. In other words, this is the reason I came. Let's get out and start working. That's why I'm here. And then Jesus, in his own words, continues the ideas. Chapter 8, verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders, the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, after 3 days rise again. So this is my job. I'm here. A few verses further down, he said unto them, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. This is not, let's have party time, or let's be dressed in the kingly robes and have people bowing down to you. This is, take up your cross, deny yourself. And further, in Isaiah we have that exact idea. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. This was Jesus' job. He was shown as a servant. In fact, if we go on to the next couple of verses, you will see Mark 9, verse 35, and he said unto them, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last, and servant of all. Chapter 10, verse 43 and 44. But so shall it not be among you. But whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. And the next verse, for even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and give his life a ransom for many. That's the King James Version. In other versions, the word ministered is actually translated as serve. The Son of Man came not to serve, but to serve. So, in summary, Jesus the servant. He has no genealogy. He is the righteous, obedient, but suffering servant. He came to serve. And have a look at how many miracles there are in the book of Mark. The most miracles are actually recorded in the book of Mark, and yet it is the shortest of the 4 Gospels. He gave his life as a ransom for many. He was crucified between 2 criminals, and he was subject to the law and to the prophets of the Old Testament. Let's look at the book of Luke. Luke was written by a Greek, 4 Greeks. It was the 3rd book written, and in it we see Jesus as a man, a perfect man, and we have a human genealogy in the book of Luke. In fact, if we look at the concept of man and perfection, the Greeks, the ancient Greek philosophers, majored in perfection. It was one of the things that really was an interest area for them. Finding perfection, finding perfect humans, finding perfect statues. The whole concept of perfection is a Greek idea. And so this perfect man was sent as a message to the Greeks. So Colossians 4:14, we hear about Luke, the beloved physician. So we see that Luke is a physician, and he's the writer of the book of Luke. We also find out from Luke's own words, as he says here in verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus. Now Theophilus is another Greek name. So we have a Greek man writing to another Greek person. But I want you to look back at that first line again. What word has he used to describe the understanding that he has? Perfect. Once again, this is the perfection that the Greeks really valued. You will find that in the book of Luke, there are details about humans. It's the human aspect that we see here, because we see Jesus as a human, as a man, perfect nonetheless. And so we find out the details of Jesus' birth. And you would expect that a physician would do that. So we have someone who was trained in looking at human conditions, human diseases, writing about Jesus as a human, a man. So we have all the details here, all the little interesting details that you don't get in the other Gospels. The angel talking to Mary, we have the message that the angel gave her, and on it continues. We find ordinary people being mentioned in this Gospel of Luke. in chapter 1, verse 5, we hear about Zacharias. And quite unusually, we find out the name of his wife, because we don't find that very often in the Bible. But her name was Elizabeth. We find more, again, about Elizabeth and what was going to happen to her. Once again, the human aspect, while we're talking about Jesus, the man. And here we have in Luke chapter 2, more ordinary people mentioned. Who's mentioned in this group? Shepherds, poor people, with not a very good job, just the shepherds. And yet, the shepherds, Jesus is the shepherd. And then we have, where is he lying? And this relates back to Sabbath school. In a manger, in a place of poverty, where the animals were. And what do we find out? Mary kept all of these things in her heart. So we find all of these interesting little human details. As we go through further into chapter 2, verse 25 to 35, we hear about Simeon, a priest. What was revealed to him through the Holy Ghost. So once again, ordinary people that we don't hear of anywhere else, just one mention. And that he was to see Jesus, or to see the Messiah before he came, before he died. And so he took Jesus in his arms, he blessed God and said, now let your servant depart in peace, according to your word, for mine eyes have seen thy salvation. Another person we see is in the next few verses, verse 36 to 38. We see Anna, if she will appear. There she is. We see Anna, a prophetess. Again, someone we don't hear of again, but we even find out who her father is. We know that she was an older lady, a great age. It talks about what she did in worshipping God, and that when she saw Jesus, she realised that she had seen the redemption of Israel. So, if we go to chapter 2, we see a little bit about Jesus' family. And you can see the offering that they gave for Jesus' birth. What does this tell us? They were poor. They couldn't afford to offer a bigger animal, so they offered 2 turtle doves, or 2 very young pigeons. We find out a few details about Jesus, something that the other Gospels leave out completely. The child grew, waxed strong in spirit, was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. We find out that incident in the temple, when he was 12 years of age, he was lost. Well, he wasn't lost. His parents thought he was lost and said, don't you know I need to be about my father's business? I need to be doing what my father wants. So we find out the human aspect of Jesus, our Saviour. The parables, that's interesting too. The parables emphasise the human aspect. The Good Samaritan, the lost sheep. What was that shepherd like? Leaving the 99 and going and finding that one sheep. That's the character of that shepherd. We have the prodigal son. There are 35 parables in the book of Luke. 19 of them are only in the book of Luke. And the emphasis, once again, is on the human element. We also have, in chapter 1, verse 32, a reminder that it traces the human genealogy. It traces the human genealogy down through his father David. It doesn't use the word king there, but down through his father David. And in Romans 1:3 it says he was a descendant from David according to the flesh. So this genealogy is traced down through Mary, not through Joseph. So, in summary, we see Jesus the man. He has a human genealogy. He is poor, but perfect. He's the second Adam. He came to seek and to save lost people. He told parables to connect with people. He was crucified, but was recognised as innocent. He perfectly kept the law and the prophets of the Old Testament. Jesus the man, the perfect man. He was perfect so that he could restore the image of God, which is perfection, in us. Let's have a look at the book of John. And we should know a lot about the book of John because it's our current study. John was written by a Jew for all people. It was the fourth gospel written. And it shows Jesus as God. I think we've seen that quite a few times in our Sabbath school lessons, haven't we? This quarter. Jesus is God. It shows Jesus as a personal God. And there is no genealogy in the book of John because God does not need a genealogy. God is. There was no one before God, so that he has no family tree that he needs to refer back to. So John, it's an interesting concept here. John, the beloved disciple, talks about a loving, personal God. So who better to speak about Jesus as God? So here we have some of the evidence for those statements that I've just made. Then Peter, turning about, sees the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper. And then we're going to skip a few verses, and this is what John says. This is the disciple which testified of these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. So John is saying, I'm writing this. I'm the one who was leaning on his breast. I'm John. I'm the one that Jesus loved. Written by John. Then we have, who is this gospel for? And I said it's for all. And the evidence, do we know this verse? I think we do. It's the one just before 16, so let's have a look at them. Verse 14, John 3:14. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Right? And verse 15, that whosoever, who's that? Everybody, isn't it? Whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And then verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And verse 17, just in case we didn't get it the first couple of times that he says it, for God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that who? The world through him might be saved. Has he left anyone out? No. Does that give us hope? Jeremiah 29:11. It gives us hope. Thank you for Sabbath school again. Let's have a look at who Jesus is then. And we see John 1:1, verse 14, verse 18, verse 29, verse 34, verse 49. There's a raft of verses there. Let's look at them one at a time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The next verse, verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Verse 18. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, has declared him. Jesus came to show us what God is like. Not that Old Testament cranky person, but a loving God. And then we have verses 29 and 34. The next day John saw Jesus coming, and he talked about him, and there's the baptism, and in verse 34 he says, and I saw and bear record that this is the Son of God. And in verse 49, Nathanael says to him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God. We have a very clear picture here. Jesus is God, and we have the witnesses who are there saying, I saw this is what I saw. I see Jesus as God. Then we have some interesting statements by Jesus himself. And we studied this in our lesson a couple of weeks ago. We have the I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. And if you look at that, you can see that there are 7 I am statements. Some of them are repeated though. We have four of them are repeated. So that now means there are 11 statements until you come to this last one. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is using the I am name. This is why they wanted to kill him. Because the I am name is Yahweh. The YHJH, or the JHY, the Yahweh name. We'll come to it in a second. So we have the I am statements. In Hebrew, you do not need to use the words I am for people to understand that you are talking about yourself. It's the same currently in Hebrew. It's the same in Japanese. Most of you will know that I taught Japanese. So if I want to say, I am going to the beach, I say, umi, beach, ni, to, ikimasu, go. Beach to go. That's how I say, I am going to the beach in Japanese, currently. I don't need to say me, I, watashi wa. I don't need to say I.
Okay.
I simply say, beach to go. It's the same in Hebrew. Jesus did not need to say, I am, but he was making a point. He was saying, God, I am God. He was using the God name in his own statements. So, in summary, Jesus is God. He has no genealogy. Jesus is the Word and is God. He came to show us the Father, with whom he is one. We get that in John 14 and John 17 again. He is the great I am, the Jehovah, the Yahweh. He was crucified but rose again because he had life within himself. And he gave the law and guided the prophets of the Old Testament. You know, I've got two more things to say here. This one is the first one. In the Old Testament, there are many prophecies regarding the Messiah coming, and they refer to the Messiah as the branch. Jeremiah 23 verse 5 says, "Behold, the days come, says the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign." Zechariah 3 verse 8 says, "Behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch." Where did we find the king? In the book of Matthew. Where did we find the servant? In the book of Mark. Zechariah says, "Behold the man whose name is the branch." Where did we find the man? Luke. And Isaiah 4 says, "In that day shall the branch of the Lord," in other words, God, "shall be beautiful and glorious." In the Old Testament, we have Jesus as king, as servant, as man, and as the branch of the Lord. That's the first one. The second thing, this text in Revelation had puzzled me for some time. And it says, "And the first living creature was a lion, and the second living creature was a calf, and the third living creature had a face as a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle." Now this is in the section where it's talking about being in the throne room in heaven and having all the beautiful throne, and there's the four. In some translations they don't call them living creatures, they call them beasts, I think. The beasts were there, the four beasts. But these four beasts, these four living creatures, one was like a lion, one was like a calf, one was like a man, and one was like a flying eagle. And as I was going through the research that I did for this, I was amazed to find how that related to what I've just been talking about, the four Gospels. And let's have a look at it. Let's see if we can organise it. The lion. "Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David." Where did we find the Lion of the tribe of Judah mentioned? Matthew. The calf. And it talks, that by the way, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, that's a reference from Revelation 5:5. The calf, and this is a reference from Leviticus chapter 9. Aaron killed the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. The calf, or a young ox, is the main animal for the temple service. Found that really interesting. Where do we find a sacrificial animal? Where do we find Jesus described as a sacrifice? In the book of Mark. Because he is the servant who came to serve and who came to give his life as a ransom for many. In Acts chapter 2, we find this comment: "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, whom a man approved of God. And then the last one, a flying eagle. And this is a text from Exodus 19, chapter 19, verse 4. And this is God speaking. You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians and how I bear you on eagle's wings. What's God doing? He's bearing people on eagle's wings. He is describing himself as an eagle. And when I saw that, I thought, this is the first time I've ever seen God described as an eagle. So then I went searching. Deuteronomy 32. As an eagle protects her nest, flutters over her young, spreads abroad her wings and takes them and bears them on her wings, so the Lord alone did lead him, Israel. God says, I am like an eagle. I am protecting you. It's mentioned in Ruth 4 or 5 times in the book of Psalms. God as an eagle. An amazing thought, isn't it? So this verse from the book of Revelation, which was the last book of the Bible written. So Revelation was the last book written. But it was written well before the order of the books in the New Testament was decided. So Revelation was written around about 90 AD, between 1993, somewhere around there. And the order of the books was decided somewhere around the 200 or 300s AD. So several hundred years before the order, before it was even decided what books would be in the New Testament, John, the Revelator, has written that verse. The first living creature was like a lion. That's the book of Matthew. Second living creature was like a calf. That's the book of Mark. Third living creature was a man. That's the book of Luke. And the fourth living creature was a flying eagle, flying in the midst of heaven like God. John had already said this is the order of the books of the New Testament, the 4 Gospels. Why do we need 4 Gospels? Because we have the most amazing and beautiful picture of Jesus. Jesus is our King. Jesus is our servant, the king and the lion. Jesus is our servant, the calf. He is our sacrifice. Jesus is the perfect man. And Jesus is God, represented by the flying eagle. What a wonderful God we have. Because not everyone can see the way a Jew thinks. So the book of Matthew was good for them. Not everyone can see the way a Greek thinks. But the book of Luke was good for them. Not everyone can see the way a Roman would think. But the book of Mark was good for them. And the book of John speaks to us all about a God who loves us beyond anything that we can understand. Let us sing 272, Give Me the Bible, because our Bible is our life.